The pre-dawn silence of the diner was broken by a sound that didn't belong. The sharp, metallic zip of a surveyor's tape measure snapping against the wood of the counter. June stood frozen in her kitchen, her fingers stained deep red with paprika and molasses, watching three strangers in sharp suits treat her life's work like a crime scene. On the butcher block behind her lay a single sheet of paper she had pulled from the morning mail, featuring a signature she would recognize anywhere. The elegant, looping scrawl of her best friend of 40 years, authorizing the demolition of everything they had built together. Outside, the first heavy rumble of a bulldozer's engine vibrated through the floorboards, rattling the jars of secret spices on the shelves. As the bell above the door jangled again, her partner walked in with a casual smile and a cheerful, "Good morning," as if the world hadn't just been sold out from under them. June felt the weight of a heavy meat cleaver in her hand, her heart hammering against her ribs as she realized the woman standing before her wasn't just her oldest friend, but the architect of a betrayal that was currently pulling the ground right out from under her feet. The pre-dawn light in Paducah didn't so much arrive as it did seep, a bruised violet stain pressing against the condensation-fogged windows of Callaghan's diner. Inside, the air was a world unto itself, thick with the ghosts of yesterday's grease and the sharp, medicinal bite of the cleaning fluid June used on the counters until her shoulders ached. She stood at the heavy oak butcher block in the center of the kitchen, her movements rhythmic and ancient. The stone pestle ground into the mortar with a dry, gravelly crunch, pulverizing peppercorns into a fine, stinging dust that tickled the back of her throat. She didn't need a clock. Her body knew the cadence of 4:30 in the morning. This was the hour of the sauce. June tilted a gallon jug of molasses, watching the dark, viscous ribbon coil upon itself in the bottom of a stainless steel vat. It looked like cooling lava, obsidian and sweet. She added the smoked paprika, the deep red powder puffing up in a cloud that settled in the fine lines of her knuckles, staining them the color of Kentucky clay. This was the secret, the thing that kept the town coming back, the thing her father had guarded like a religious relic. As she whisked in a sharp splash of apple cider vinegar, the chemical reaction hissed, a bright, acidic tang cutting through the heavy sweetness. The fumes made her eyes water, a familiar sting that she welcomed. It felt like honesty. The diner was silent, save for the low, rhythmic thrum of the walk-in refrigerator and the distant, lonely whistle of a freight train cutting through the hills. June wiped her brow with the back of a flour-dusted forearm. Her hands were a map of her life. Small white scars from grease pops, a permanent callus on her middle finger from the paring knife, and skin that felt like worn leather. She reached for the stack of mail she'd dumped on the end of the bar the night before. A chore she'd been avoiding. Bills, always bills. The electric company's envelope was a sickly shade of blue, the water bill a stark white. She sorted them with a practiced, weary efficiency, her mind already calculating the weight of the brisket she needed to prep for the upcoming barbecue festival. But then, her thumb caught the edge of something different. It was a heavy, cream-colored envelope, the paper thick enough to feel like an insult. There was no stamp, just a hand-delivered look to it. June's heart gave a strange, stuttering thud against her ribs. She slid a butter knife under the flap, the paper resisting before tearing with a sound like a dry branch snapping. The words didn't make sense at first. They were too cold, too legal. Transfer of property rights? Chicago Development Corp? Parcel 42B. June's vision blurred at the edges, the kitchen light suddenly too bright. She gripped the edge of the laminate counter, her knuckles turning the color of bone. The document stated that the land beneath Callaghan's, the dirt her father had bought with blood and sweat in 1955, the floorboards she had scrubbed for 40 years, no longer belonged to her. It spoke of eminent domain, of private-public partnerships, of a revitalization project that sounded like a funeral. But it was the bottom of the page that truly broke the world. There, in the space for the co-owner's signature, was a familiar, looping scrawl, a capital M, with a long, elegant tail that curled back on itself like a snake. Marlene. June felt a sudden, icy rush of nausea. She traced the ink with her thumb, the ridges of the paper feeling sharp. Marlene Wilson had been her partner since they were 22. They had buried parents together, celebrated birthdays, and shared the silent, heavy burden of keeping a small-town business afloat in a world that wanted everything fast and cheap. Marlene was the front of the house, the smiles, the charm, the bright red lipstick. Jun was the back, the heat, the smoke, the grit. The signature looked fresh, the ink dark and arrogant. June remembered Marlene laughing yesterday, complaining about the squeak in the screen door, promising they'd get it fixed before the festival crowds arrived. It had been a performance, a masterpiece of betrayal. The bell above the door jangled, a sharp, violent sound that shattered the morning silence. Jun didn't move. She couldn't. She watched as 3 men stepped into the diner. They didn't look like locals. Their suits were too sharp, their shoes too polished for Paducah's cracked sidewalks. They didn't take off their sunglasses. One of them, a man with a jaw like a hatchet, pulled a steel tape measure from his belt. The zip-clack of the metal tongue extending was like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Excuse me," Jun said, her voice sounding thin and strange to her own ears. "We aren't open." They ignored her. Hatchet Jaw walked to the far wall, snapping the tape against the wood. Another man tapped a tablet screen, his eyes roaming the ceiling as if looking for cracks. They moved with a terrifying, clinical indifference, as if June were simply a ghost haunting a building that had already been demolished. The tallest of the 3, a man in a charcoal suit that smelled of expensive cologne and air-conditioned offices, stepped up to the counter. He didn't look at Jun. He looked at the space 6 inches above her head. He slid a blue folder across the scarred wood, right over the pile of bills. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a smooth, practiced baritone. "I'm James Harris, representing Chicago Development. This is your formal notice of vacate. The City Council approved the final zoning yesterday afternoon." June's hand went to the St. Anthony medal at her throat. "The City Council doesn't own this. I own this. The records indicate a full sale of the primary interest," Harris replied, finally meeting her eyes. His gaze was as flat as a frozen pond. "Signed by your partner, Mrs. Wilson. The funds were escrowed 48 hours ago. You have 2 days to remove any personal effects. Anything left after Friday morning will be considered scrap." He gestured vaguely at the kitchen, at the copper pots June's mother had brought from Ireland, at the oversized jars of spices. "I'd suggest you start packing. The demolition crews are on a tight schedule." June's fingers curled into the fabric of her apron. The rage was starting to burn through the shock now, a slow-rolling heat that felt like the bottom of a cast-iron skillet. "Get out," she whispered. "We have a right to survey. Get out." June's voice didn't rise, but it sharpened, a blade being drawn across a whetstone. Harris sighed, a sound of mild annoyance, and signaled to his men. They followed him out, the door swinging shut with a heavy thud that rattled the open sign. June stood alone in the center of her kitchen, the blue folder mocking her from the counter. She lunged for her phone, her fingers trembling so badly she nearly dropped it. She hit Marlene's speed dial. Ring, ring, ring. Voicemail. She tried again, and again. Each unanswered call felt like a brick being added to a wall. She could see Marlene's face in her mind, the way she touched her ear when she was lying, the way she never quite finished a cup of black coffee. The silence on the other end of the line was the loudest thing June had ever heard. She threw the phone onto the prep table. It skittered across the stainless steel and hit a bowl of onions, the screen glowing with Marlene's smiling contact photo. The door opened again. This time, it wasn't a suit. Marlene walked in, a bright silk scarf fluttering at her neck, her heels clicking rhythmically on the linoleum. She was humming a tune June recognized from the radio, something light and vapid. She looked normal. She looked like the woman June had known for 40 years. "Morning, Junie," Marlene chirped, tossing her keys onto the counter. "Lord, it's humid already, isn't it? I think we're in for a storm before the festival kicks off. Did the meat delivery come yet? We're going to need those ribs prepped by noon." She moved behind the counter, reaching for an apron as if the world hadn't just ended. She began wiping down the coffee urns, her movements fluid and practiced. June watched her. She felt like she was watching a stranger wearing her friend's skin. The folder was heavy in June's pocket, the sharp corner of the paper digging into her hip. She wanted to scream. She wanted to take the heavy meat cleaver from the magnetic strip and demand the truth. But something stopped her. A cold, hard instinct that had kept her father's business alive through recessions and floods. If she confronted Marlene now, Marlene would run. She'd call the lawyers, the suits, the police. June would be out on the sidewalk before the sun reached its zenith. "The delivery is late," June said, her voice a flat, dead thing. Marlene paused, her hand hovering over a stack of napkins. She didn't turn around. "Oh? Well, Grady's getting old. Probably overslept. I'll give him a call in a bit." "Don't bother," June said, turning back to the stove. "I'm sure he'll be here." She took a head of cabbage and began to shred it, the knife hitting the board with a rhythmic, violent thwack, thwack, thwack. She didn't look at Marlene. She couldn't. She needed to think. She needed to know why. The morning rush began. A blur of faces June had known for decades. Mr. Henderson, who took his eggs over easy. The Miller boys, who always argued over the sports page. The girls from the hair salon next door. Marlene worked the room like a politician, pouring coffee, laughing at old jokes, touching shoulders. She was perfect. But June, watching through the pass-through window, saw the cracks. She saw the way Marlene's hand drifted to her ear every time the door opened. She saw the way Marlene's eyes darted toward the office in the back, a nervous, flickering motion. When the lunch rush finally died down, Marlene excused herself, claiming a headache. "Just need 20 minutes in the back, Junie. The light's getting to me." June waited. She waited until she heard the back door of the office click shut. Then, moving with the silence of a cat, she slipped into the narrow hallway. The office was a cramped space, smelling of dust and the peppermint candies Marlene sucked on when she was stressed. June didn't go to the desk. She went to the small, battered safe tucked under the filing cabinet. Marlene thought June didn't know the combination, but June had watched her dial it 1,000 times over the years. Left 14, right 32, left 05. The mechanism clicked. The door swung open. June's hands moved through the files, past the tax returns and the insurance policies. She found it at the bottom, a thick, gray envelope. Inside were not business documents, but a stack of debt markers. Zero Club, Brent Wilson, $15,000, $22,000, $40,000 alert. The numbers blurred. Brent, Marlene's son, a man who had always been a shadow in Paducah, a man who smelled of gasoline and desperation. The markers were stamped with the logo of a casino in the city, the kind of place where people went to lose things they didn't own. Jun felt a sickening wave of clarity. Marlene hadn't sold the diner out of greed. She'd sold it out of a mother's twisted, suffocating love. She was buying her son's life with Jun's legacy. A floorboard creaked in the hall. Jun shoved the papers back, closed the safe, and stood up just as Marlene appeared in the doorway. "Jun, what are you doing in here?" Marlene's voice was sharp, the mask slipping for a fraction of a second. "Looking for the ledger," Jun said, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I thought I left it on the chair." Marlene's eyes searched Jun's face, looking for a tell. For a long, agonizing moment, neither woman moved. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioner and the distant rumble of a truck on the main road. "It's in the kitchen, honey," Marlene said, her voice softening back into its practiced lilt. "You're just tired. Why don't you go home for a bit? I can handle the prep." "I'm fine," Jun said, pushing past her. She walked out the back door, needing air. The alleyway was narrow and damp, the brick walls holding the midday heat. She leaned against a stack of crates, her breath coming in ragged gasps. That's when she saw the smoke. It wasn't much. Just a thin, gray wisp curling up from the enclosure where the trash bins were kept. Jun frowned, moving toward it. As she rounded the corner, she saw the orange glow. The plastic bins were melting, a foul chemical stench filling the air. It wasn't an accident. A trail of gasoline led from the bins toward the wooden stairs of the diner's back entrance. "Hey!" Jun shouted. Two figures bolted from the shadows of the neighboring building. They were wearing hoodies, their faces obscured. But Jun recognized the gait of the taller one. The swagger, even in flight, Brent. She didn't chase them. She lunged for the heavy red fire extinguisher mounted near the door. She ripped the pin out, the metal biting into her palm, and squeezed the handle. The white foam hissed out, a freezing cloud that smothered the flames, turning the melting plastic into a grotesque, bubbling mass. Jun stood in the settling dust, the empty extinguisher heavy in her hand. Her lungs burned. Her clothes reeked of smoke and burnt oil. It was a warning. A hurry up from the people Brent owed. She went back inside, her face a mask of soot and fury. Marlene was standing by the grill, her face pale. "Jun? What happened?" I heard a noise. "The trash caught fire," Jun said, her voice low. "Some kids probably." She walked past Marlene, not stopping until she reached the telephone in the kitchen. She dialed Grady, the meat supplier. "Grady, it's Jun. Where's the truck?" There was a long pause on the other end. "Jun, I'm sorry. Marlene called this morning. Said the diner was closing. Said you were filing for bankruptcy and the accounts were frozen. I can't release the order without a wire transfer, and your bank... They said the signature on the account changed." Jun gripped the receiver so hard she thought the plastic might snap. "I didn't file for anything, Grady. I don't know what to tell you, Jun. I've known you a long time, but Marlene's the one who handles the books. My hands are tied." The line went dead. Jun looked at Marlene. Marlene was busy arranging salt shakers, her back turned, her shoulders tense. The betrayal was complete. Marlene was cutting the oxygen, one line at a time. Jun stepped out onto the sidewalk, needing to see the town, to feel the ground beneath her feet. Paducah felt different today. The air was heavy, the sky a bruised yellow. She walked toward the center of the square, where the fountain sat dry and forgotten. A crowd had gathered near the old oak tree. In the center was Marlene. She was holding a handkerchief to her eyes, her voice a soft, tragic trill. "It's just so hard," she was saying to a group of neighbors. people Jun had fed for 40 years. She's having these episodes, forgetting where she is, getting aggressive. I've tried to protect her, but I can't run the place alone while she's like this. It's for the best, really. A nice, quiet facility where she can be looked after. Jun watched from the shadows. She saw Mrs. Green, who Jun had given free soup to when her husband died, nod sympathetically. She saw the pity on their faces, the kind of pity that was just a step away from erasure. Marlene wasn't just stealing the diner. She was stealing Jun's mind, her reputation, her very place in the world. Jun turned away before she could be seen. She walked back to the diner, her feet heavy. As she approached the parking lot, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up, blocking her path. The window rolled down. Brent leaned out, his eyes bloodshot, a jagged scar on his cheek that hadn't been there a month ago. "You're making this difficult, Jun," he said, his voice a low, gravelly threat. "My mom's trying to do you a favor. Take the payout and go. Somewhere far. Maybe a beach." "I'm not going anywhere, Brent," Jun said. He leaned further out, the smell of stale beer and desperation rolling off him. "You think you're tough? You're an old woman in a greasy apron? These people I owe, they don't have patience. You keep holding up this deal, and the next fire won't be in the trash." "Is that what your mother thinks?" Jun asked. "That she can burn me out?" Brent laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "She thinks she's saving me. And she is. Don't get in the way of a mother's love, Jun. It's a dangerous thing." He spat on the pavement and sped off, the tires screeching. Jun went inside. The diner was empty now, the closed sign flipped. Marlene was gone. Jun walked to her office. She tried to log into the bank account on the old computer, but the screen flashed red. Invalid password. She tried her birthday, her father's birthday, the date the diner opened. Nothing. She sat in the dark, the only light coming from the flickering neon open sign that she hadn't turned off. She was alone. No money, no meat for the festival, no lawyer who would take her call because they were all on the development company's payroll. She looked at the walls, at the photos of her father, of the town's first parade, of the day they'd survived the flood of '78. "If I stop fighting, it all goes away," she whispered to the empty room. The lie she'd told herself for 20 years, that the diner was a prison, crumbled. It wasn't a prison. It was the only place she was real. A loud thump came from the front of the building. Then the sound of shattering glass. Jun ran to the dining room. A brick lay on the floor amidst a sea of glass shards. Tied to the brick was a note, written in thick, black marker. "Last chance. Signed by sunset." Jun picked up the brick. It was heavy, rough, and cold. She looked out the broken window. Across the street, the construction crews were already unloading barriers. Huge, yellow machines, bulldozers and cranes, sat like sleeping predators on the edge of the lot. They weren't waiting for her to sign. They were just waiting for the sun to go down. Jun didn't call the police. She knew the sheriff was Harris's golf partner. Instead, she went to the kitchen and grabbed her best chef's knife. She sat at the counter and began to sharpen it, the shh, shh, shh of the steel against the stone, the only sound in the dying light. The next morning, the world was a construction site. Jun woke up on the cot in the back office to the sound of a pile driver. Thump, thump, thump. The very earth beneath the diner seemed to protest, the vibrations rattling the copper pots until they chimed like funeral bells. She walked into the dining room and stopped. The front windows, the ones she'd just boarded up after the brick, were being covered by a massive blue banner. Chicago Development, the future of Paducah. Through the gaps in the boards, She saw them. Men in orange vests were erecting a chain-link fence topped with concertina wire. They were enclosing the diner, turning it into an island in a sea of mud and gravel. Marlene was there too. She was wearing an orange hard hat, laughing with the site foreman, pointing at the diner's roof as if she were planning a garden party instead of a demolition. Jun felt a surge of adrenaline that tasted like copper. She went to the back door, but as she turned the handle, she realized it wouldn't budge. She peered through the small, reinforced window. A steel beam had been bolted across the frame from the outside. She was locked in. "Marlene!" she screamed, pounding on the door. "Marlene, open this door!" Outside, the foreman looked at Marlene. Marlene simply shook her head, a look of profound sadness on her face. She said something to the man, and he nodded, walking over to a large gray box mounted on a temporary pole. He flipped a switch. Suddenly, the signal on Jun's phone vanished. The no service icon stared back at her, a digital death sentence. They were going to wait her out, or bury her. Jun didn't panic. Panic was for people who had something left to lose. She went to her desk and pulled out a small, battered cardboard box she'd kept since her father died. Inside were old tapes, the kind used in the micro-cassette recorder her father had used for inventory. She found the one labeled Legal, 1982. She popped it into the dusty player and hit play. "And let it be known." Her father's voice crackled, sounding like he was speaking from the bottom of a well, "that the land of Callaghans is held in a perpetual trust. Neither partner may sell, lease, or transfer the deed without the notarized physical presence of the other. This isn't just a business, Junie. It's the ground you stand on. Don't let 'em take the ground." Jun closed her eyes. The ground. She looked at the floor, the old, cracked linoleum. She remembered the day her father had installed the walk-in freezer. He'd complained about the old ice delivery tunnel that ran under the building, a remnant of the town's Prohibition-era history. He'd covered it with a heavy steel plate and a layer of concrete, but he'd never filled it in. "Too much work," he'd said. "Besides, a back door is always a good thing to have." Jun moved to the pantry. She began shoving aside heavy sacks of flour and crates of canned tomatoes. There, beneath a layer of dust and a tattered rug, was the edge of the steel plate. It took her an hour of prying with a crowbar, her muscles screaming, her breath coming in ragged hitches. When the plate finally groaned and shifted, a smell of damp earth and ancient rot rose to meet her. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed a rucksack, stuffing it with the tapes, the debt markers she'd stolen from the safe, and her father's original deed. She added a small jar of her secret spice blend, the heart of the diner. Above her, the first blow of the wrecking ball hit the far corner of the building. The sound was cataclysmic, a roar of rending wood and shattering brick. Dust rained down from the ceiling, coating Jun in a gray shroud. She lowered herself into the dark. The tunnel was narrow, the walls slick with condensation. She crawled on hands and knees, the sound of the demolition muffled now, a rhythmic, subterranean thumping. She followed the slight incline, knowing it led toward the drainage pipes near the main square. When she finally reached the rusted iron grate at the end of the line, she could hear music, the festival. She pushed with all her might, the grate resisting before popping free with a screech of rusted metal. Jun scrambled out into the tall grass behind the town's bandstand. She looked like a creature from the earth, covered in soot, grease, and mud, her apron torn, her hair a wild, white mess. But she was out. The square was packed. The smell of wood smoke and roasting meat was thick enough to chew. On the main stage, a large banner read, "A farewell to tradition, the new face of Paducah." Marlene was there, standing at the microphone. She'd changed into a stunning navy dress, her pearls gleaming in the stage lights. "It is with a heavy heart," Marlene's voice boomed over the speakers, "that I announce the permanent closure of Callaghan's diner. My dear friend Jun, as many of you know, has taken ill. But today, we celebrate the future. Chicago Development has promised us." Jun didn't wait. She marched toward the stage. People turned, gasping. Some backed away, thinking she was a vagrant. But as she reached the edge of the light, the whispers began. Is that Jun? Look at her. Marlene was right. She's lost it." Jun ignored them. She climbed the stairs, her heavy work boots thumping on the plywood. The security guard moved to stop her, but June held up the micro-cassette player like a weapon. "Let her speak," a voice cried out from the crowd. It was Mr. Henderson. He was standing near the front, his eyes narrowed. "Let's hear what the crazy woman has to say." The guard hesitated. Jun stepped up to the microphone, shoulder to shoulder with Marlene. Marlene's face went from shock to a mask of pure, cold hatred in a heartbeat. "June, honey, you should be in bed. Someone call the ambulance." "Shut up, Marlene," June said. Her voice wasn't loud, but into the microphone, it sounded like thunder. The crowd went silent. Jun didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply reached into her bag and pulled out the debt markers. "This is why the diner is closing," June said, holding the gray slips of paper up to the TV camera that was filming the event for the local news. "Not because I'm sick, not because the business is failing, but because Marlene Wilson sold our home to pay for her son's gambling debts." A gasp rippled through the square. "That's a lie," Brent shouted from the side of the stage, moving toward her. But Harris, the man in the charcoal suit, stepped in front of him, his face pale. He knew a sinking ship when he saw one. Jun hit play on the recorder. Her father's voice filled the square, clear and undeniable. The legal clause, the trust, the requirement for June's signature. "I didn't sign anything," Jun said, looking directly into the camera. "Which means the sale is illegal. Which means the demolition happening right now is a crime." The crowd erupted. In a small town, gossip is a spark, but the truth is a forest fire. Marlene looked around, her eyes wild. She looked at the neighbors she'd lied to, at the cameras, at the son who had cost her everything. She reached out to touch June's arm, a desperate, fluttering motion. "Junie, I had to. They were going to kill him." Jun looked at the woman she'd called a sister for 40 years. She felt a profound, hollow sadness. "You could have told me, Marlene. We could have fought them together. But you chose them. You chose the lie." The police were moving in now, but not for Jun. The sheriff, seeing the way the wind was blowing, headed straight for Brent, who was trying to slip into the crowd. Harris, the developer, was already on his phone, barking orders to his legal team, his face a mask of corporate damage control. He didn't look at Marlene. He didn't look at Jun. He was already calculating the cost of the exit strategy. June stepped back from the microphone. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a crushing, bone-deep exhaustion. She walked off the stage and through the crowd. People tried to touch her, to offer words of support, but she didn't see them. She walked back toward the diner. The wrecking ball had stopped. The machine sat silent in the mud. The corner of the building was gone, a jagged wound showing the interior of the kitchen, the sunlight hitting the copper pots for the first time in decades. June sat on the edge of the construction barrier. The sun was beginning to set, casting long golden shadows across the ruins. She was alone. The diner was a shell. Her best friend was a ghost, She reached into her bag and pulled out the small jar of spices. She opened the lid and inhaled. The scent of smoked paprika and cumin and secret things filled her lungs, sharp and alive. She looked at the broken walls. She looked at the ground, the dirt that was still hers. She didn't have a plan. She didn't have a partner. But as the first stars began to blink through the Kentucky haze, June Callaghan stood up. She wiped the soot from her face, gripped her father's deed in one hand and her spice jar in the other, and began to walk through the ruins, measuring the space for the new walls.